Part 13. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 121. How many classmates do you have? It's too dangerous to get lost in this wilderness. The sentry casually handed a bottle of mineral water to Su Ming and asked with a smile. He waved his hands behind his back in the direction of the sentry, indicating not to shoot until he could find out the situation. Su Ming took the mineral water without saying a word, and drank it in a gulp as if he had been thirsty for a long time. After drinking more than half a bottle, he burped and stopped. He glanced at the cages of the animals and asked in confusion, "Brother, what are you doing?" "Oh, we are from the Provincial Animal Protection Association. These animals are injured and we are taking them back for treatment." Ming Xiao said righteously, "You young people are too naughty. The deep mountains and old forests are where you should go. If something happens, your parents will be so distressed." It was those female classmates who insisted on going into the mountains for adventure. As a result, there was no signal for the mobile phones in the mountains, and the compass and other things were all out of order. "We walked for a day and a night but couldn't find the way out." Hearing the words "few female classmates," Ming Xiao's eyes flashed with evil, and he said with a straight face, "Where are your other classmates? Hurry and ask them to come over. We have a map. When we go out of the mountain, we will take you with us. It's not far behind. Come over here. We met a good person." Su Ming held his hands into the shape of a big speaker and shouted loudly towards the woods where he came from. Ming Xiao also narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction Su Ming was looking for those female classmates. "Where are they? Come here, look, those are the ones in the woods." Su Ming pointed at the woods and said. The branches in the woods shook, as if someone was walking towards the side. Ming Xiao licked his lips and smiled. "At such a young age, you know how to act as a flower protector. Your female classmates are all pretty. They are all school beauties, and there are also amateur models," Su Ming said seriously. "Oh, that's good, that's good." Before Ming Xiao finished speaking, he felt a bang behind his head, a sharp pain, countless little stars appeared in front of his eyes, and then his body tilted, and he knew nothing. "You, it's your turn to hum my female classmates, I haven't done it myself." Su Ming kicked Ming Xiao, who was lying on the ground, twice, holding a bloody pebble in his hand. Ming Xiao lay motionless on the ground, his back of the head was covered in blood, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Su Ming sniffed his breath, only to find out that the TV shows that you can tell whether you are dead or alive by sniffing your breath are all lies. When you are seriously injured, your breath is so weak that it is almost the same as death. It is really hard to judge if you are not a professional. Su Ming did not hesitate to search his body and found a wallet with several thousand yuan in it. He stuffed all of it into his pocket, and took off the pistol in his arms, the dagger on his leg, and the small electric baton, and armed himself. He wanted to call out the silver ring snakes to bite him again, but the venom of the 2 silver ring snakes had been exhausted. After all, there were only a few other highly toxic animals in the mountains, and it was not so easy to find them, so he simply called a small group of wasps to bite Ming Xiao. Those wasps are already very toxic, and it is not a problem for a dozen of them to sting a person to death, let alone a half-dead person. It is estimated that Ming Xiao will soon be reunited with Anshao in the underworld. Is this considered murder? Su Ming scratched his head, feeling quite strange. It stands to reason that the emotions should be very complicated at this time, and a little scared, but Su Ming's heart was almost calm, just like going to the vegetable market to buy vegetables. Could it be that after staying with animals for a long time, my mentality has changed, and I have really become a big monster? I treat human life as worthless. It seems that I can take the right path of killing people. Ha ha ha, it seems that I am born with the aura of a king. Su Ming boasted foolishly, then opened the cage and let the Saker falcon catch the 2 unconscious macaws and fly to a safe place to wait. After using mental power to explore, the golden monkey was somehow not dead, but just fainted, and the giant salamander was also dizzy. Su Ming looked at the waterfall. With such a commotion, it has been a long time since Boss He and the others went in. They may come out at any time, and now there is no time to save these two guys. Su Ming was full of curiosity about the cave behind the waterfall. He made up his mind, holding a pistol in one hand and an electric baton in the other, and swam to the big rock under the waterfall, and jumped into the back of the waterfall. There was a concave space behind the waterfall, which could accommodate 1 or 2 people. The ground was covered with moss and was very slippery. One had to hold onto the rocks to barely stand. In the middle of the concave area, there was a hole with a diameter of about 1 meter and less than 2 meters. It was dark and no one knew where it led to. There were constant trickles of water flowing out of the hole, merging with the water flow of the waterfall and flowing into the pool. Su Ming lay at the entrance of the cave and listened. There was no sound inside. He held up the pistol and electric baton and went into the cave. A not so strong cold wind blew in his face, and it was also mixed with a thick mist. Then the faint light came in from behind, and he saw that the cave was in the shape of a vertical oval. Su Ming walked in it and could barely stand up, but the space on both sides was very narrow, and he had to turn sideways to pass through some places. The cave was damp and dark. The deeper one went, the quieter it became, forming a sharp contrast with the sound of rushing water outside. It was eerie and a little scary. Fortunately, the cave was not very deep, only about 20 meters, and it became open at the other end. Oh my God! Su Ming was shocked by what he saw. In front of him was a huge cave. The top of the cave was covered with stalactites, pointing to the ground. The ground was also rocky, and there were springs and streams everywhere. According to the location, the top of the cave should be the stream where the waterfall flows. From time to time, there is a trickle of water seeping from the top of the cave and falling on the ground. After years of dripping, small puddles are formed. There may be some small holes or cracks leading to the surface at the top of the cave. The sunlight squeezes out from the cracks and falls into the cave, forming faint light spots of various sizes and shapes, which also brings weak light to the originally dark cave. With the light, you can see that there are many caves of different sizes on the mountain walls around the cave. Some are as small as a palm, and some are so big that one person can even drill into them. They are similar to cave dwellings. Su Ming was amazed at the scene in front of him when he suddenly heard footsteps and voices from the depths of the cave. He quickly crouched down and hid behind a large stalagmite, revealing half of his face and looking around. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 122. The cave is very large, and even the slightest sound can cause an echo. Therefore, Su Ming was unable to determine the specific direction of the sound for a while. He could only have a rough range, which should be a mountain wall in front of him on the right. There are more than a dozen cave entrances of different sizes on the mountain wall. Not long after, a black shadow flashed at the entrance of the largest cave. Boss He got out of it, jumped to the ground holding onto the stone wall, and followed closely by the strong man Big Bear also came out of the cave. Damn it, Big Bear cursed as he rubbed his head, which was still bleeding faintly. There are high and low caves in the cave. The giant bear man is tall and big, so it is very inconvenient to drill into the cave. He probably hit his head just now. Boss He ignored him and blew a whistle in his mouth. It seemed that these people were looking for something in the cave. There was an immediate response from the cave, and not long after, Qian Lao and another poacher emerged from another cave entrance. The cave was more than 2 meters high and more than 1 meter wide. It was almost the largest cave in the cave. It was only 30 or 40 centimeters above the ground. Qian Lao stepped on the ground and pointed. The cave behind him said, "Boss He, come and take a look, there seems to be someone living here." "What, someone lives there?" Boss, he was slightly shocked. This shitty place is dark and humid. It's freezing even in summer. It can freeze someone to death at night. Who would live here? It's just that the old man hangs himself because he doesn't want to live long. Confused by doubts, Boss, he still took the big bear into the big cave. I don't know what Jian Lauer found in the cave that made him think that someone was living there. Su Ming also wanted to go into the big cave to have a look, but to show up at this time was to seek death. The entrance of this cave was so hidden that if it weren't for the giant salamander, such an accident. Even if you were standing outside the waterfall, no one would have thought that there was a large cave behind the waterfall. If you died here, no one would notice you until you turned into a pile of bones. So I could only suppress my curiosity and wait patiently, thinking that Boss he and the others would have to leave at some point. Now that I know the location, I can just come back to explore the secret later. It's a pity that we didn't find more poison. Otherwise, if some poisonous snakes or the like were ambushed at the entrance and took a bite when Boss he and the others came out of the cave, these people would all die here. Now that he had already taken action, Su Ming was not prepared to show mercy. These people had small flamethrowers and were difficult to deal with for a long time. Su Ming planned to have Urgoza bring a swarm of wasps to ambush them in the middle of the night after they got out of the cave. The fact that Boss he can order 2 sentries to kill people shows that these people are not good people. If they are killed, they will be killed. It is not a big deal. This big hole is just left for them. It didn't take long for Boss he and the others to come out of the largest hole. As they walked, Boss he said, maybe what the buyer wants is the thing in the hole. Since it's nested here, the thing will definitely come back. Let's go out first and ambush around the pool. Everyone, please be careful. Something? What is it? It's okay that Boss he didn't say anything. Su Ming's heart was scratching his head like a cat's claws when he said it. What kind of animal lived in the big hole that was so valuable? Calculated in millions of dollars, even if the ancestor of the giant panda comes, I'm afraid it will only be this price. Fortunately, Boss he and the others did not seem to be planning to stay in the cave any longer. After discussing for a while, they walked back towards the cave entrance along the original path. The team of poachers was almost close to the stalagmite where Su Ming was hiding. At the nearest, they were less than 1 meter away from Su Ming. They filed out and got into the hole one by one. Behind the stalagmites, I held my breath and didn't dare to move. After all these people had gotten into the exit cave, Su Ming stood on tiptoes and sneaked up to the entrance of the big cave like a big cat. A fishy smell of rotting meat came from the hole. Su Ming turned on the flashlight on the other end of the electric batten and shined it into the hole. I saw that this big hole was only 4 or 5 meters deep, and there were some animal bones with flesh and blood scattered on the ground. There is a pile of hay and firewood at the end of the cave, like a sleeping nest. There are also some stones of different shapes on the ground beside the haystack. Some are flat, some are long and thick like sticks, and some are as long and thick as sticks. There are some watermelon-sized stones, and I don't know what they are used for. Huh? Not good. Su Ming was observing the cave in front of him, and suddenly remembered that Boss he and the others said they would guard the entrance of the cave, so how could he get out? Besides, Ming Xiao's body is still outside. Boss he and the others will definitely be on guard when they see the bodies of their companions. Damn it, he took too big a step and finally tore his balls. Thinking of this, Su Ming no longer bothered to study the monsters in the cave, and quickly returned along the original path, hoping to escape from behind the waterfall while Boss he and the others were surprised that their companions were killed. As long as he can escape into the woods, the mountain is his world. Unless Boss he blows up the mountain with an atomic bomb, even if their firepower is 10 times stronger, there is nothing they can do to him. On the contrary, he has many ways to deal with them. We walked out along the exit of the cave. As soon as we reached the entrance of the cave and before leaving the waterfall, We heard several roars and gunshots coming from the shore outside the waterfall. "What's going on?" Su Ming boldly looked out from the water curtain. "I saw a strong man standing in the camp on the shore with no hair on his body. The strong man was probably 2 meters tall. He had copper-colored skin, a full beard, and his hair had grown to his waist." "Savage," Su Ming was stunned. "I'll go. Although he has an unshaven beard, this savage seems to be too handsome, right? Generally, savages are raised by animals. They have a stooped body shape and even walk on all fours. They behave more like animals than people." However, the long-haired and bearded man in front of him, apart from being a bit slovenly, has nothing to do with it. There were too many animal characteristics: tall and straight body, strong back and waist, and smooth muscle lines, which reminded Su Ming of the god of war in ancient Greek mythology. Su Ming was sure that if this guy could shave off his long hair and beard and put on human clothes, he would look no different from a normal person. At this time, 3 of the 4 poachers raised their guns and pointed at the strong man. The big bear, which was originally as strong as a bodybuilder, was pinched by the neck with one hand and held up in the air, like a poor rag doll. Ho! Roar! The strong man held the big bear in one hand, blocking it in front of him like a shield, and roared fiercely at the other 3 poachers. There was a huge wound on his right shoulder, the flesh was turned out, and blood was pouring out. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 123. Bang. I don't know who fired the shot, but the savage, with agility that was totally inconsistent with his huge body, jumped out like a cat and actually dodged the shot. But the big bear in his hand was in bad luck. The savage seemed to vent his anger and swung his arm to smash the big bear to the ground. Su Ming could clearly hear the muffled sound of clang through the sound of the waterfall. His eyelids were twitching. He saw the big bear's head fall upside down, like a steak, and was smashed into the ground by the savage. The head and half of the shoulder were buried in the ground, leaving only half of the body exposed. The ground of the camp was a layer of pebbles on the top and mud below. After the big bear was stuck into the ground, its 2 legs shook twice in the air, and large streams of blood came out from the gaps in the pebbles. "Oh my God, it's such a miserable death," Su Ming sucked his teeth and sucked in a breath of cold air. It hurt to watch. To vent his anger, the savage stabbed the bear to death. He immediately lost his shield and was surrounded by the remaining 3 poachers with 3 rifles. He seemed to be a little afraid of firearms. He didn't dare to move for a while. He leaned down slightly and roared at the poachers in a low voice. The poachers never thought that they would meet a savage on this trip. As for the value of a living savage is incalculable. Although 3 companions died, as long as the savage can be caught, this trip is definitely worth it. Boss, he looked fierce and shouted, "Don't hit the vitals. Catch him alive. Qian Lao tranquilizer gun." The poachers were all fierce and had seen many deaths. The other 2 did not retreat at all because of the death of their companions. On the contrary, they were excited and slowly approached the savage with guns in hand. As the saying goes, a friend dies, but a poor Taoist dies. One more death means one less person to share the money. Qian Lao pulled out a tranquilizer gun. Without even aiming, he raised his hand and fired a shot. The savage also dodged to the side, avoiding Qian Lao's shot, but before he could stand firm, another poacher shot another anesthetic from behind, hitting the savage in the waist. "Ah!" the savage roared to the sky, and with a very fierce backhand, he broke the needle of the tranquilizer gun inserted in his waist. His feet staggered, but he did not fall. Instead, he picked up a pebble and smashed it hard at the man who fired the gun. The man had long been prepared for the savage's counterattack. Before the savage's pebble shot, he bent his leg slightly and prepared to dodge to the side. Unexpectedly, before he jumped up, a faint puff sound suddenly came from the waterfall behind him, and a small anesthetic needle flew out of the waterfall and stabbed him in the back of his waist. Of course, the anesthetic cannot take effect instantly, but the man was inevitably distracted by the stab in the back, and it was only a moment before he reacted. The pebble in the wild man's hand had already whistled over and hit him in the face. Clang! The hardness of the human skull is not exaggerated. The hard pebble suddenly broke into several pieces. The man's head was like a headshot. His face was full of peach blossoms and was smashed into a watermelon. He swayed and fell to the ground. Oh my God! It's too bloody. Su Ming took a breath again. How strong is this wild man? The stone in his hand is even more powerful than a gun. There was a mess outside. Seeing that another companion had died, He Lauda and Qian Lao fired at the same time. Bang bang, one shot hit the wild man's thigh and the other shot hit the wild man's buttocks. The wild man screamed and fell to the ground covered in blood. The savage had strong vitality. If it was a normal person, he would probably lose half of his body after being shot 3 times in a row by a rifle. Even if he was not shot, the anesthetic injection would be enough to knock down 2 or 3 normal people. Even so, the savage could not hold on any longer. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath, and blood flowed out of the wound as if it was free. This is worth it? Second brother Qian, $1.5 million US. 750,000 each for the 2 of us. Hey, that's not right, boss. We agreed that I would get an extra 200,000. Why, now that everyone else is dead, you don't want to admit it? Boss Qian's eyelids fluttered, and subconsciously moved the muzzle of the gun pointed at the savage slightly towards Boss He. He Lauda's face darkened. Your grandma. Qian Lao, what are you doing? The goods haven't been sold yet, and you're fighting among yourselves. I tell you, if you kill me, you can't get it out of the mountain by yourself. That's not what I said, Lao He. We are all bloodthirsty people. If you bully me, that won't work, Qian Lao said sinisterly. Okay, what's the point of talking? I'll give you an extra 200,000 yuan. Hurry up, put that wild man in a cage. Get some hemostatic medicine, don't let it die. Yeah, that's what the eldest brother said. He Lauda, otherwise I, Qian Lao admire you, you are so righteous, Qian Lao said. He Lauda waved his hand impatiently. Stop talking bullshit, hurry up, we have to find a way to get this big guy out of the mountain. Okay, Qian Lao put his rifle behind his back, holding a pistol in one hand and an iron rod for subduing wild animals in the other, and walked towards the wild man. This iron rod is specially used to deal with animals. It is about 1.5 meters long. There is a rope noose on one end of the rod. When the noose is put on the neck of the prey and pulled, the rope will be locked. The prey cannot attack the person on the other end of the iron rod from more than 1 meter away. If you don't want to be strangled to death, you can only let it be manipulated honestly. With a few movements of his hands, Qian Lao put the rope around the savage's neck. The savage roared and tried to untie the noose. Qian Lao gently pulled it, and the noose was tightened tightly. The savage's neck, embedded in its flesh. Ho ho, ho. The savage screamed unwillingly, his hands with long nails clenched tightly on the noose, and his eyes were bloodshot due to bloodshot eyes, full of anger. What's your name? If I hadn't planned to sell you for money, I would have killed you with one shot. Qian Lao dragged the savage towards the cage like a dead dog. At this moment, a gunshot suddenly sounded behind Qian Lao. Qian Lao shrank his head in fright, rolled around like a lazy donkey, deftly removed the rifle from his shoulder, lay on the ground and aimed at Boss He. Datu He, I'm going to your mother. But Boss He was still holding a half bottle of mineral water behind his back. After the gunshot, he was startled. The mineral water bottle in his hand fell to the ground and he reached for his gun with his backhand. It wasn't until Chien Lao aimed his fire that Boss He's hand just touched the barrel of the gun, so it was absolutely impossible for him to fire that shot. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 124. Chien Lao raised his gun and saw that Boss He still had the gun behind his back. The shot just now was not fired by Boss He at all. The two looked stunned. "My hands stink," Su Ming muttered behind the waterfall. It must be emphasized that Su Ming is a serious masturbator. The old man in the family was engaged in animal protection in the wild. Su Ming had been exposed to the 54 pistol since he was a child. When he grew up, he also participated in live ammunition shooting during military training, so the captured imitation 54 gun was not unfamiliar to him. But being able to masturbate is not the same thing as being able to shoot accurately. Chien Lao was only about 20 meters away from the waterfall. Su Ming held up his gun behind the waterfall for a long time, but it still missed. The bullet missed Chien Lao by at least 20 or 30 centimeters and flew into the woods. Masturbating is difficult. It doesn't mean that you can just shoot. The key is to shoot accurately. At a distance of more than 20 meters, even a police officer who has undergone systematic training cannot guarantee a 100% hit rate. A 50% or 60% hit rate is considered good. As for within 20 meters, hit wherever you point, that is the level of a sharpshooter. As a handjob amateur, missing the target from a distance of 20 meters is actually not too shameful. Outside the waterfall, Mr. He and Mr. Chien were stunned for a moment, and then at the same time shifted their gaze to the back of the waterfall. The pistol did not have a silencer. Anyone who was not deaf could clearly distinguish the location of the gunshot. The two people immediately made standard designed actions, lying on the beach and pointing their rifles at the entrance of the waterfall. "Damn! Who, get out!" Before Chien Lao could finish his words, there was another gunshot from behind the waterfall, and a bullet hit the ground less than 20 centimeters away from him. The pebble fragments jumped up, leaving a trail of blood on his face. Without saying a word, Boss He fired 3 consecutive bullets at the back of the waterfall. After the bullets submerged in the water curtain, it was like a stone sinking into the sea, without any movement at all. Su Ming also cursed. Fortunately, he had watched a lot of war movies and had some fighting experience. He did not stay where he was after shooting, but immediately hid in the hole. As soon as he dodged into the cave, a few sparks appeared on the mountain wall where he was standing, and a large piece of rock was brought down by 3 bullets. If he took a step slower, there were already several more gun muzzles on his body. Anyway, now that he had been exposed, Su Ming simply took the risk, shouted out a substandard Mandarin at the top of his lungs, and shouted to the outside in a serious tone, "This is the Forest Armed Police, this is the Forest Armed Police, you have been surrounded, immediately putting down your weapons is your only way out." "Let your mother go," his response was a bullet. Su Ming showed no weakness and fired based on his feeling. He didn't know whether Chien Lao was unlucky or lucky. Su Ming's guns were all aimed at him, but he hit him every time. The bullet hit the ground not far away from him. Jump and fly past his scalp. Damn, Chien Lao felt his head move slightly, as if he had been cut by a knife, and he almost peed in fear. If the bullet had been lowered by just 1 centimeter, his life would have been wiped out. So without hesitation, he rolled sideways and rolled to a blind spot at the entrance of the cave behind the waterfall. Unless the man in the cave got out of the waterfall, it would be impossible to target him again. Chien Lao had just rolled away, and before he could even raise his gun to aim, something hit his back, as if he had hit something. Immediately after, his neck tightened, and an unpleasant smell of body odor came from behind. Chien Lao suddenly reacted. He didn't pay attention in his haste, and rolled to the side of the savage without death. Qian Lao's heart suddenly dropped to his intestines when he thought that the savage who killed people like chickens was right behind him. Why haven't you fainted yet? Has the anesthesia gun failed? This was Qian Lao's last thought. The savage was feeling sad and angry, and his head was still a little dizzy, but when he saw Qian Lao coming to the door on his own initiative, how could he be polite? He grabbed Qian Lao's neck with one hand, and before Qian Lao could raise his gun to hit him, he held a fist as big as a casserole in one hand and punched Qian Lao's head 3 times before going down. In ancient times, this savage's fists would have been more powerful than Lu Zixin's. Lu Zixin killed Butcher Zheng and used a flurry of punches. But he was lucky. After 3 punches, half of Qian Lao's head was punched into the ground. Inside, half of the head was exposed, as if a vat of miscellaneous sauce had been knocked over, with red and white blood all mixed together. This is great, only one of the 6 poachers is left, Boss He. Boss He is also very depressed. What is this? The 6 people on my side were all armed to the teeth with guns and ammunition. They were all veterans. Even if they encountered a squad of armed police, they could deal with them. However, they didn't even see the other party, and they killed 5 of them neatly. If he hadn't been a soldier and had a good psychological quality, I'm afraid he would have collapsed first without Su Ming or the savages taking action. Especially the 2 men who died outside the cave were so inexplicable. One was lying on a tree, his body turned black, and it looked like he had been poisoned. The other's head was smashed open, and his face was as swollen as a pig's head. If he were not still wearing clothes, Boss He would hardly be able to recognize him. His 2 men were very skilled and clever, otherwise he would not have let them stand sentry, but they were easily killed by the other side without even being able to warn them. Judging from this, the opponent is not many in number, but he is definitely a master among masters. He is good at close combat, good at using poison, good at using stones. Who is this? In an instant, several groups of people appeared in Mr. He's mind, including hunting teams from the Middle East, Black Plague mercenaries from South Africa, fallen angels from North America, and Blackwater security guards. His mind was a little confused. These groups of people were not something they could afford to offend. Strictly speaking, they were not even qualified to provoke them. Could it be that the employer killed someone and silenced him? Boss He was startled. He took a deep breath and hid behind an iron cage. He held a gun in one hand and grabbed a backpack containing dry food with the other, and sneaked back into the forest. Although Boss He wears glasses and looks like a scholar, in fact they are flat glasses, purely for cover. His real vision in both eyes has reached 1.2. He was born as an Aryan when he was young. When he grew up, he served as a soldier and fought in jungle warfare. Boss He was confident that as long as he retreated into the woods, that would be his world. He could use the deep mountains and old forests as cover to slowly figure out the enemy's situation, and even reverse the situation of the battle by surprise. For the last time, put down your weapons and surrender, and I will spare your life. There was a faint voice shouting from behind the waterfall, and the tone was quite sincere. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 125. As the saying goes, good words can't save a damn devil. Su Ming's good intentions fell in the ears of Boss He, but they became a symbol of the other party's lack of confidence. If it weren't for the lack of strength, why would the other party still shout and directly attack? Just come out and destroy yourself. You're too young to do this with me. His eyes flashed with a hint of cruelty, and he crouched slowly back into the forest, preparing to find a bunker to hide first, and then act according to the situation. There were too many bunkers in the deep mountains and old forests, and there were big trees hugged by 2 or 3 people everywhere. Boss He ducked and hid behind a tree, revealing half of his face, and looked at the waterfall with a telescope. Just as he was watching, deep in the jungle in the distance, a sound of buzz, buzz, suddenly came from the distance, and it kept getting closer. Boss, he quickly turned his head and took a look. At this glance, he was stunned. I saw a large swarm of wasps in the forest in the distance, like black clouds, rushing towards me, and they were in front of me in the blink of an eye. Su Ming hid behind the water curtain and saw a big black ball rushing out of the forest. The big ball stumbled and ran towards the outer river. It let out heart-piercing screams as it ran. It didn't run away. After a few steps, he fell to the ground. I can't bear to watch it. Su Ming felt goosebumps all over the floor, and his whole body was extremely itchy. So far, all 6 poachers have died, and the wasps have returned to the forest to wait. Boss, his body is simply too horrible to look at. Su Ming got out from behind the waterfall, looked at Boss He's body and sighed, thinking about me. I'm not lying to you. If you are willing to surrender, I really won't kill you. I can hand you over to the country, and maybe you can get some rewards or something. This is great. All 6 people are dead. How can we leave this to the state? Not to mention 6, even I can't carry it alone. Besides, it's hard to explain if there is no proof. Forget it, let's not burden the comrades at the crematorium and return to the embrace of nature. Su Ming held onto the big stone by the stream, vomiting, and thinking about something to distract himself. The scene was so bloody that even he couldn't accept it. Hai Dongqing took Hui Ya, one on the ground and one in the air, vigilantly observing the surrounding environment. They're all dead. They're all dead. So disgusting. So disgusting. The 2 parrots woke up at some point and jumped out of the forest. Seeing this scene, they started to scream strangely. A parrot didn't pay attention and jumped on the savage. After the savage hammered Qian Lao to death, he lay there motionless. The parrot probably thought that the savage was dead, so it lowered its head to peck him. Before it could peck, the savage suddenly reached out and grabbed the macaw by the neck. Sister! The parrot's voice stopped before he could finish his curse words. He couldn't scream when his neck was strangled. His whole body was shaking wildly and his feathers were flying everywhere. Stop, Su Ming yelled. The scene was so chaotic just now that he actually forgot about the savage. This savage was so powerful that even if he was in a dying state, he could easily kill an adult with just a pinch. How can the macaw withstand it? The savage was still 6 or 7 meters away, and it only took him an instant to snap his neck. Even if Su Ming could fly, he would not have time to rescue him. He really killed the bird with his talk. Su Ming's face turned pale with anxiety, and he cursed in his heart, calling you a bitch. Call you a bitch. Damn, I just got a shot in the morning, why didn't I learn my lesson? When I woke up, I was a bitch. Now everyone is satisfied, we are finally going to make ourselves miserable. Su Ming was used to using his mental power. When he was nervous, he subconsciously directed a stream of mental power towards the savage. Unexpectedly, as soon as the mental power came into contact with the savage's wrist that was about to grab the parrot's neck actually stopped and raised his head with difficulty. A pair of big and bright eyes looked at Su Ming blankly, with a bit wary. Eh? What's going on? Su Ming was also confused for a while. He seemed to be able to communicate with the savages using his mental power. There is no problem with mental power communicating with animals, and it can even control animals. Su Ming has thought before that humans are also a type of animal after all. Since mental power is useful to animals, it may be equally useful to humans. For this purpose, he had tried several times, but he didn't know whether it was because he thought wrongly or because human intelligence was far superior to that of all animals. Mental power had no effect on humans at all, at least he couldn't see any effect. But in the moment just now, both the savage's reaction and the feedback from his mental power proved that mental power was effective on the savage. Is it because this guy lived in the wild or grew up with animals, so he is half human and half animal? While Su Ming was puzzled, he released a little more mental power to test the savage. His mental power was full of goodwill. Judging from the mental power alone, Su Ming's attitude towards the savage was simply worse than that of a lover who had reunited after being separated for many years. Be affectionate. Sure enough, the savage slowly put down the parrot, and the wariness in his eyes quickly disappeared. The macaw was put down, and it quickly flapped its wings and jumped far away, opening its mouth and yelling, "Sister! Sister!" Not to be outdone, the other parrot helped in the other direction, "Punch your mouth! Punch your mouth!" Now even Su Ming wanted to strangle them both. Who did they learn these nonsense from? Next time, a sign must be put up in the parrot area to prohibit tourists from swearing. Of course, the savage didn't understand these dirty words. He made a faint sound of ho-ho in his throat, covered the wound on his shoulder, and looked at Su Ming for help. "Oh, hold it in, I'll find some medicine to stop the bleeding." Su Ming quickly got up and rummaged through the poacher's equipment. It was because the savage had a strong physical fitness. If it were someone else, even if he wasn't shot to death, he would have died from excessive bleeding. Even if he didn't bleed too much, he would have fainted because of the anesthetic gun. After searching for a long time, he finally found a bottle of Yunnan Bio, some gauze, and alcohol to stop bleeding. Su Ming walked up to the savage with courage and shook the medicine in his hand at him. "I'm here to save you, it will be a little painful, don't hurt me." Su Ming squatted down carefully and repeated his meaning in 2 steps using mental power and human language. The savage opened his eyes wide and nodded vigorously. Su Ming was relieved. He opened the white medicine, took out a small pill from the powder, stuffed it into the wild man's mouth, and asked the wild man to eat it. The old-fashioned Yunnan Bio has this kind of small pill, known as the life-saving pill, which is used for internal use. When the wild man opened his mouth, his teeth were quite white, but he had not brushed his teeth for many years and ate raw food. His breath was too heavy, and Su Ming almost fainted. Su Ming fed him the pill, covered his nose, cleaned the wild man's wound with alcohol, and sprinkled the white medicine on his wound. During the whole process, the wild man's face was pale and obviously in pain, but he should understand that Su Ming was saving him, and he gritted his teeth and endured it. But now it can only stop the bleeding temporarily. There is a bullet in the wound. He must go out of the mountain immediately and find a doctor to perform surgery to remove the bullet, otherwise the inflammation and infection will kill him. But the problem is that the savage is injured and probably can't walk that far. Su Ming can't carry him because he is so big. It's okay to carry him for a few dozen meters, but it's impossible to carry him out of the deep mountains. Unless a helicopter comes to pick them up now, the savage will never get out of the mountains. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 126. Su Ming used alcohol to disinfect the savage's wound, and then used Yunnan Bio and gauze to bandage him for a simple treatment. The bleeding finally stopped. Rather than saying that the bleeding stopped, it would be better to say that the savage's blood was almost flowing out. There were 3 bullet holes in the shoulder and the buttocks behind the thigh. After being shot, he did not receive timely treatment and lay on the ground. When Su Ming and He Lao were fighting, he intervened and beat Jian Lao Er. It was almost 10 minutes until everything was settled. If it was an ordinary person, the blood would have flowed out of the 3 big bullet holes in such a long time. It was only because the savage's physical fitness was so strong that he could still live. It was also a fluke. It was probably because of the excessive bleeding that the anesthetic did not work. Although the savage was pale, he was still sober and did not faint. If he was injured so badly and fainted again, even a god would die. "Hold on, I'll carry you out of the mountain to find a doctor." Su Ming was sweating profusely. There was still a long way to go from here to the outside of the mountain. Carrying the savage on his back would be even slower. Even if he could be considered to be carried out of the mountain, the savage would probably not be able to hold on by then and would die halfway. There was no other way, so he had to give it a try. Although the savage could sense the spiritual power, he was not a pure beast after all. The healing effect of the spiritual power on him was not as obvious as on other animals. Moreover, the injury was too serious, and he would die even if he bled. Do your best and leave it to fate. It depends on the savage's own luck. Unexpectedly, just as Su Ming bent down to carry the savage on his back, the savage shook his big hand with a layer of fluff, then turned over with difficulty and crawled towards the direction of the pool. Huh? Does the savage have the tradition of water burial? Is he going to wait for death in the pool? Su Ming was stunned. The savage was crawling on the ground, leaving a trail of blood under him. He had no strength before he reached the shore. He lay on the ground, panting heavily, tilting his big head, staring at the direction of the waterfall with wide eyes. Su Ming suddenly realized, what a bullshit water burial, this guy was going to crawl back to the cave behind the waterfall. The big cave in the cave with traces of human habitation was probably his home. Hold on, hold on. I'll take you in. Su Ming used his mental power to test it, and his judgment was indeed correct. The savage did have a strong desire to return to the cave. Su Ming didn't know why he was going back, but he didn't have time to discuss anything now. He hurried up, grabbed the savage's arm, and with a force from his waist, he carried the savage's huge body behind him. As the saying goes, dead heavy, people are especially heavy after they die. Although the savage didn't die, he only had half of his life left. In addition, the 2-meter-tall big guy was heavy. Su Ming staggered and was almost crushed by the savage. The savage also screamed in pain. Fortunately, the waterfall was not far away. Su Ming gritted his teeth and carried the savage to the pool, put on the small rubber boat, jumped on the boat, and paddled to the edge of the waterfall. Then he used all his strength to carry the savage to the depression behind the waterfall, and dragged him from the cave entrance into the cave. The savage's breath was getting weaker and weaker, and his mind was a little unclear. In the feedback from his mental power, he was in a daze, and his body was twitching from time to time. He was about to die. Hey, don't die. Hey, Su Ming was so anxious that he slapped the savage's face twice. He wanted to slap his face, but he used too much force in a hurry, and it turned into a slap in the ear. The whole cave could hear the crisp slap. The mental power was also like it was free, and it was poured into the savage, hoping to stimulate him to come back to life. Fortunately, it really worked. After being slapped twice, the savage's cloudy eyes brightened a little, and he made a sound in his throat again, and his mind became slightly clearer. After seeing the surrounding environment clearly, the savage twitched his nose twice, tilted his head, and stretched out his tongue like a big dog to lick the water stains on the ground of the cave. Su Ming thought he was thirsty due to excessive blood loss, so he quickly took off the military water bottle on his waist to feed the savage. The savage sniffed at the mouth of the water bottle, but did not drink the pure water in the water bottle at all, but continued to lick the water stains on the surface. For the savage's picky eating behavior, Su Ming simply poured out all the water in the water bottle, stood up and looked around. The location of the cave is actually below the waterfall river. The ground is all stone. Water keeps flowing down from the inside and top of the cave. The water accumulates little by little. The cave is full of trickles of water. On the bumpy ground, small puddles of different sizes are formed. Su Ming found a puddle the size of a wash basin, put the kettle in the puddle, filled half of the kettle with water, and handed it back to the savage. The savage sniffed it a little, nodded heavily, and made a sound in his throat. He opened his mouth and held the kettle and gulped it down. After drinking the water in the kettle, the savage seemed to have received a shot of cardiotonic. His eyes regained clarity. He even supported his body with one hand and sat up on the ground, panting heavily. Su Ming was stunned when he saw this, and quickly used his mental power to explore. The vitality of the savage was obviously much stronger. He quickly filled another half pot of water, then supported the savage and slowly walked back to the largest cave. This cave was indeed the savage's home. After entering the cave, the savage fell headfirst on the pile of hay, gasping for breath. After such a struggle, the savage's gunshot wound broke open again, and the gauze was bloody red, and blood kept oozing out of the wound. Su Ming frowned slightly, thought for a moment, took out a Swiss Army knife and a lighter from his pocket, and imitated what he had seen on TV, and heated the blade back and forth over the flames to disinfect it. Cutting flesh to remove bullets is a technical job. You have to cut open the flesh of the wound and then forcefully remove the bullet from the wound. This process not only hurts the wounded to death, but is also extremely dangerous. If you are not careful, you can easily injure a big muscle. It becomes a disability. If the bullet sneaks into the bone, it will be more troublesome. At the same time, cutting the wound will cause a lot of blood loss and can easily kill someone. Of course, Su Ming didn't know how to do this kind of technique, and he had no practical experience, but now on the road in Huashan, he could only gamble on his luck, other than forcibly removing the bullet. Otherwise, if the delay continues, once the wound becomes inflamed and suppurative, the savage's life will definitely not be saved. Su Ming looked at the savage and said seriously, using both mental power and human language, "I'll help you take out the bullet. It will be very painful." The savage looked at Su Ming with wide eyes, and roughly understood what Su Ming meant. He made 2 hiccups in his throat, and then nodded. Su Ming held the hot knife and made 2 gestures at the wound on the savage's leg, thinking about where to place the knife. "I'm trying to save you, so please don't hit me." After Su Ming finished speaking, he cut it off with a knife. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 127. The cave echoed with screams one after another. Huya and Heidongking, who were guarding outside the cave, looked at each other. At first, they were ready to rush behind the waterfall to rescue people. Fortunately, Su Ming used his mental power to notify them in time, and these guys behaved honestly. "Really stay and watch by the waterhole." The screams in the cave gradually turned into whispers. In fact, it didn't take long, but Su Ming felt as if several years had passed before the operation was finally completed. Looking at the 2 bullets that were taken out in front of him, he let out a long breath and sat down on the ground tiredly. Even though the savage's face was covered with hair, it could still be seen that his face was frighteningly pale, and he was lying there weakly, with the haystack under him already stained red with blood. He was quite lucky. None of the 3 bullets hit his vitals. The savage's muscle density was quite astonishing. 2 bullets were embedded in his muscles. 1 rifle bullet penetrated his body and flew out from the other end. So Su Ming only found 2. As for Su Ming's surgical skills, they were of course extremely poor. It could be judged from the screams of the savage that Su Ming, the barefoot doctor, was not very good at operating. When he first cut open the skin and flesh, Su Ming was still able to keep his composure, his heart was not beating and his hands were not shaking. Although the savage was also in pain, at least the pain was relatively crisp and smooth, and the pain was pleasant. But it is not that easy to find a bullet in the wound. The bloody skin, flesh, and bones are mixed together, and the light in the cave is very dim. It is not easy to find a small bullet. Su Ming himself is quite nervous. The rough man was as good as digging into the savage's wounds with his fingers. The savage fainted from the pain and came back from the pain several times. Only his naturally strong body could withstand it, but someone else would have died of pain long ago. Changing place, Su Ming felt that if he were a savage, he would rather die than let himself, a second-hand sword, operate. Fortunately, all this has finally passed. Compared with surgery, Su Ming's bandaging skills are obviously more than one level higher. He uses alcohol to disinfect, sews up the wound with sewing thread, and applies medicine. After working for a long time, I finally got it done. Actually, it's not bad. Su Ming's hands were covered with blood, and he looked at the wound on the savage's thigh that was sewn up like a flower with great interest. The savage was still alive. He tilted his head to look at his wounds and reluctantly showed Su Ming a silly smile. Such a smile seemed to have touched the wound again, and his voice trembled slightly in pain. Have a good rest. If you don't have a fever after tonight, your life will be saved, Su Ming said to the savage. The savage pointed at the kettle, as if he was thirsty again. Su Ming handed the kettle to the savage. The savage had a really big bottle of water. He only drank half of the jug of water when he entered the cave. As a result, he drank a few more gulps from the kettle and drank half of the military kettle. There was still a little bit left. He licked his lips with unfinished thoughts and pointed at the small puddle outside the cave. Still drinking? Damn, let me tell you in advance, if you drink too much water, I won't wait for you to pee. Su Ming was also convinced. In just a short while, he drank 5 or 6 kilograms of water. How big a belly does the savage have? The savage opened his bright eyes and looked at Su Ming pitifully. Su Ming couldn't stand the sight of him, so he waved his hand and compromised, okay, I won't abuse patience. I'll get you some water after that. He stood up with the kettle and walked outside. He found a small puddle and returned with half a kettle of water. The savage looked happy, and chirped at Su Ming a few times in a voice that no one could understand, and then held the kettle with his free hand. In the blink of an eye, half the bottle of water was down again. This guy was shot again today, and was tortured by Su Ming's knife again. He walked life and death several times. After drinking water, he finally couldn't hold on any longer and fell into a deep sleep, snoring slightly. Su Ming touched it and found that the temperature of the savage's forehead was still normal and there was no fever. At the same time, I noticed that the snoring sound is different from human snoring. Human snoring comes from the nose or throat. Some fat people make the sound from the chest. When savages snore, the sound comes from the abdomen, which is very similar to that of wild beasts. Similarly, Grey Fang's stomach would growl when he slept. Su Ming was full of questions now and was very tired, but he had no time to explore the truth now, let alone when he was sleeping. He left the cave first. The corpses scattered outside had to be dealt with quickly, otherwise the smell of blood might attract large beasts. Fortunately, the poachers brought relatively complete equipment. A few engineer shovels helped Su Ming a lot. Huiya also helped by digging the ground with his 2 front paws. It didn't take long to dig out a big hole. Su Ming searched for a while and found a total of more than 6,000 yuan on several people, 3 bank cards with unknown passwords, several pistols, and some odds and ends. As the saying goes, money is something external to the body. It cannot be taken with you in life or death. Since these people went to see Marx, they must have brought those colorful banknotes and guns and weapons with them to no use. Maybe the great proletarian revolution, the instructor will also label them as one of the 5 black categories, and they will have to accept criticism from the people even if they die. In this case, Su Ming accepted them all, then pushed a few corpses into the pit and buried them, and then covered them with a new layer of cobblestones, which looked no different from other ground around the pool. Ashes will return to dust, and you will have to pay back everything you come out to do. Mother Earth is fooling you. Death is the most important thing, so Su Ming recited a few nondescript eulogies, then turned around to look through the equipment brought by these people. Firearms and ammunition, outdoor tools, hunting equipment, food, drinking water, except for the last 2, Su Ming can't use the rest for the time being. Not only can't use them, most of the things can't even be exposed for the time being, such as the rifles and pistols, and a small pile of yellow bullets wrapped in oil paper. If these things are discovered, it will be bad luck. But they may not be useless in the future, especially weapons and ammunition. These things are very dangerous and can't be thrown around. It would be bad if they hit flowers and plants or were picked up by children. Su Ming asked Hai Dongqing to help and moved all these things to the hidden cave behind the waterfall, hiding them in several caves with relatively high terrain and no water. If they are needed in the future, it won't be too late to come here to get them. After doing all this, it was almost completely dark. Su Ming left Goza with a few wasps to stand guard outside and called all the animals into the cave. The Saker falcon, Greyfang, and macaw were old members and were very obedient. After entering the cave, they looked around curiously. Without Su Ming's order, they did not dare to run around. They all gathered in a large cave opposite the savage cave to rest for a while. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Se Nian Bai. Chapter 128. Su Ming used his mental power to communicate with the two new members of the team, the golden monkey and the giant salamander. They were both relatively easy to get along with. The golden monkey was not seriously injured. Su Ming checked it and found that it had lost some hair and had some skin injuries. Everything else was normal. The giant salamander had the habit of hoarding food. When it bit it into the cave, the giant salamander was not hungry and was ready to save it for later. As a result, before the giant salamander could eat, Qian Lao went into the cave and drove the giant salamander out. Compared with monkeys like macaques, the golden monkey was relatively well behaved. After figuring out the situation, the little golden monkey shrunk his shoulders and squatted in the corner of the cave, with his dark eyes open, looking at the macaw sisters and the gerfalcon with some fear. These guys were several times larger than him and felt very oppressive in the cave. And that gray little wolf, it looked hard to mess with. "Call me uncle. Call me uncle. Smile. Smile." The two parrots surrounded the golden monkey on the left and right and started to talk dirty. The little golden monkey couldn't call it uncle at all. It was so scared that it huddled up and hid in the corner without daring to move. "Don't scare it. Especially you two. If you can, let the Saker falcon call you uncle," Su Ming greeted him on purpose. After all, it is also a national first-class protected animal. The huge giant salamander also woke up. The two black little fish stared at Su Ming for a while, looking a little unfriendly, but soon, they shook their heads and became scared. Although this guy is fierce, his intelligence is not low. He has lived for many years. In fact, his brain is still very useful. He quickly figured out a few things. First, Su Ming has no hostility. Second, it is powerless to resist. Third, it seems that the guy in front of it saved it. Combining these 3 points, it is obviously asking for trouble if it makes a mistake. The giant salamander seemed very familiar with the cave. It crawled into the cave of the wild man, nudged the wild man with its head, and saw that the wild man seemed to be still alive. It crawled out again, found a big stone like a bed in the cave, climbed up and lay down. "So you two are neighbors," Su Ming used his mental power to explore and figured out the relationship between the giant salamander and the wild man. At first, he thought that the giant salamander raised the wild man, but later, looking at the wild man's behavior, he didn't look like a wolf boy raised by animals, but more like a human. It is estimated that these two guys are just a pair of neighbors. I don't know how they can live in peace until now. They haven't been eaten by each other. It's really rare. Wow, wow. The giant salamander's cry rang out in the quiet cave. Su Ming's eyelids were heavy. Holding a pistol, he leaned not far from the wild man and fell asleep quickly. Su Ming didn't know how long he had slept, but he felt his face was hot. When he opened his eyes, the savage's big hairy face was right in front of him, and his big nostrils were blowing out hot air. "Good morning." Su Ming didn't know when he became so brave. If it was in the past, he would have been scared to death when he opened his eyes and saw this scene, but now he was completely calm, without even a trace of fear, and even lazily greeted the savage. He. The savage showed an ugly smile on his face, holding Su Ming's military canteen in one hand and shaking it at him. Wow, you want to drink water again, brother, are you done? Are you the reincarnation of Shawujing? Before Su Ming finished muttering, the savage actually got up from the ground, bent over and supported the wall, slowly walked to the entrance of the cave, and then imitated Su Ming's yesterday and pressed the canteen into the puddle to fill it with water. Huh, Su Ming was a little surprised. This guy actually recovered so quickly? After being shot 3 times and sleeping for only 1 night, he could barely walk. He got up and walked to the entrance of the cave. The savage didn't even look at him. He half crouched beside the puddle, opened his eyes wide, stared at the kettle, and swayed back and forth, making strange emphasis in his throat, as if he had encountered something incomprehensible. Su Ming looked into the pool and laughed. This guy turned the mouth of the kettle upwards, exposed it outside the water, and put the bottom of the kettle into the puddle. He poured it for a long time, but didn't get a drop of water in. That's not how it's used. Let me teach you. Su Ming smiled and shook his head. The savage was imitating his action of pouring water yesterday, but he didn't see it clearly yesterday when he was lying in the cave. The savage handed the kettle to Su Ming in confusion. Su Ming deliberately slowed down his movements, pointed the mouth of the kettle at the puddle, put it down diagonally, and then the water poured in along the mouth of the kettle, and a string of bubbles came out. Hee. The wild man's eyes lit up, and he danced with joy. However, his movements were too big, and his wound was affected, causing him to grimace in pain. You try it. Su Ming poured the water back into the puddle, raised the empty kettle and handed it to the wild man. The wild man took the kettle with a big hand, first looked at Su Ming, then looked at the kettle in his hand, and finally stared at the puddle for a few glances. He looked a little uncertain, and then he imitated Su Ming and slowly put the mouth of the kettle into the puddle at an angle. There was another string of bubbles, and the wild man was very excited to see the water poured in. He laughed foolishly, he, as if he was playing a game, constantly pouring out the water in the kettle, refilling it, pouring it out again, and refilling it again, having a lot of fun. After filling the kettle with water every time, the wild man would shake the kettle at Su Ming as if offering a treasure, and when he heard the sound of water hitting the kettle, he would smile with satisfaction. Su Ming smiled and shook his head. The savage at this time, except for being a little bigger and stronger, looked like an innocent child. And just a dozen hours ago, Su Ming saw his extremely dangerous side. He held the strong man De Xiong in his hand like a doll and smashed him to death. He punched Qian Lao's head and even dodged the first bullet by feeling at the critical moment. Su Ming rubbed the savage's messy head and said, I'll teach you something else later. Don't play now. Go back to the cave and rest. The savage could understand some of Su Ming's words without using his mental power. He nodded vigorously, then held the kettle full of water in both hands and handed it to Su Ming. Is it for me to drink? Su Ming asked. He, the savage thought Su Ming didn't understand what he meant. He raised his head while holding the kettle, made a drinking gesture, and handed the kettle to Su Ming. Su Ming took the kettle and frowned slightly. He felt yesterday that the water here was a little strange. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 129. When we first saw the poachers by the pond, they used a small device to test the water quality. It seemed that they found this place based on the water quality of a certain sample. This shows that the water quality here is obviously different from other places and is very special. It's a pity that the small equipment and the big bear's head were smashed to pieces by the savages, otherwise they could have used it. The other one is the savage. His recovery speed is amazing. On the one hand, it is because of his strong physique, and on the other hand, his mental strength has played a role. But now thinking back, it seems to be inseparable from the water here. After being injured, the savage struggled to return to the cave. After entering the cave, he immediately wanted to drink water. Before the operation, he drank several kilograms of spring water. After waking up, the first thing he did was to fetch water to reward his lifesaver. All this implicitly shows that the water here must be different. In addition, the size of the giant salamander is also a bit too amazing. The size of giant salamanders is related to their age, and age is directly linked to food and water quality. This giant salamander is estimated to be no less than 2 meters long, so the water quality here must be amazingly good, far better than Shuahun Lake. Su Ming estimated that it should even be far better than the national first-class water quality. It seems to make sense, and it's okay for the savages to drink it. On the contrary, the more they drink, the more energetic they are. Those animals also drank a lot of water from the cave, so it shouldn't be poisonous. Su Ming poured some water into the palm of his hand, then stretched out his tongue and licked it. Taste. Spring water generally has no taste. If spring water has a taste, it's weird, unless someone pees upstream. But the spring water here has a very light strange smell. Su Ming was afraid that he was too suspicious and made a mistake, or that the water was stained with the smell of his palm, so he bravely leaned over the edge of the pool and took a sip. There is indeed an indescribable strange smell. Saying strange taste does not mean it is unpalatable. The water was very clear. When it entered the mouth, it was a little astringent and slightly sweet, but this feeling would disappear almost immediately. After the water flowed down the throat, it would even produce a feeling of melting into the body. In general, the water in the cave is colorless and tasteless, but drinking it can make people feel very fragrant. Is there any special nutrition? Su Ming was a little uncertain. The savage saw Su Ming drinking water and grinned happily. Then he also lay down beside the small puddle, buried his head in the water, and drank it hard. In one breath, the small puddle was almost empty. There were such puddles everywhere in the cave. Water kept gathering from all over the cave and soon filled the puddle again. This cave is said to be very large, but except for the large and small caves on the surrounding stone walls, the remaining main space is relatively empty and can be seen at a glance. Su Ming tilted his neck and looked around. There was nothing special in the cave. The top of the cave was full of stalactites pointing downwards, and some water drops dripped down the tips of the stalactites and fell to the ground. Maybe it's because of the stalactites. Su Ming was also a little unsure. According to legend, after practicing in ancient times, taking stalactites could help one achieve enlightenment. This statement was of course not very reliable. Su Ming was not sure whether he could become an immortal by eating this thing every day, but he would definitely get gallstones. Stalactites are actually calcium carbonate, calcium hydroxide and other things. They do have certain medicinal value. Many medical books have records that they cannot help one become an immortal, but taking a small amount can still clear away heat and fire, nourish yin, and strengthen yang. Maybe the water quality here is related to the stalactites above his head. The savage drank enough water. Seeing that Su Ming was thinking about something, he was stunned for a moment, and imitated Su Ming, sitting on the ground with his cheeks dragging, tilting his neck to the sky, but his eyes were blank, and he didn't know what he was looking at. Su Ming was amused by him, pointed at the water on the ground, and then pointed at the stalactites above his head, and asked with his mental power. He, the savage shook his head repeatedly. Su Ming was stunned. The water here has nothing to do with the stalactites. The savage stood up with the help of a big stone beside him, pointed his finger at the innermost direction of the cave, and shouted twice. Seeing that Su Ming was still sitting on the ground, he simply reached out to pull Su Ming's arm and pulled him over there. "Slow down, don't break the wound again." Su Ming quickly got up and helped the savage in turn. The savage looked a little anxious, pointed to the front, and took Su Ming to the depths of the cave. Although the savage walked very slowly, the cave was not big, and it didn't take long for him to reach the deepest end of the cave. This is a relatively high place in the cave, with a mountain wall on one side, and there is also a pool under the mountain wall, just like under the waterfall outside. However, the pool is not big, about the size of a round table for 12 people in the hotel. There are small streams flowing into the pool and then flowing out of the pool. Standing here, you can find that most of the water in the cave flows out through this pool. The wild man brought Su Ming to the edge of the pool and pointed at the pool and kept shouting. "There's nothing special about this." Su Ming looked at it and was really confused. This is not a spring, but just a larger puddle. It is estimated to be at most 30 to 40 centimeters deep. You can see the pale rocks at the bottom of the water at a glance. There are no fish or anything in it. Everything is normal and there is nothing special. The savage sat on the edge of the pool, tilted his body, and slid into the pool. He lay on his back in the pool, soaked the wounds on his buttocks and thighs in the water, and then used the only hand he could move to scoop up water and sprinkle it on the wound on his shoulder. Su Ming laughed. "Oh, I see, is this where you usually take a bath? Are you inviting me to take a bath? The water quality here is indeed very good, and it is indeed refreshing to take a cold bath on a hot day, but Su Ming is not going to take a bath. The cave is originally heavy with yin energy, and the water here is very cold. Su Ming does not have the terrifying physique that the savage can't kill. If he is not careful, he will leave a root of disease. If ordinary people soak in this kind of yin and cold water and are affected by the cold, the biggest possibility is that they will have no children and grandchildren." The savage did not answer Su Ming. He lay in the pool and played with the water for a while. He soaked his whole body. Only then was he satisfied, turned around and lay in the big bathtub and drank 2 gulps. Su Ming swallowed his saliva. At this moment, the savage suddenly opened his palm and grabbed the gray-white rock at the bottom of the pool. After grabbing it, the hard rock was as fragile as foam. The savage grabbed a large piece and left several finger marks on the rock at the bottom of the water. "Oh my God, what a joke! The powerful eagle claw skill." Su Ming's eyes almost popped out. This was too exaggerated. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 130. The savage easily grabbed a large piece of rock from the bottom of the water, which scared Su Ming so much that his eyes almost popped out. The savage was indeed fierce, strong, fast and strong, but in the end, he was just a flesh and blood body. How could he possibly tear the rock? Not only did he tear it, but he also grabbed a large piece. This is not weathered rock. The rock in the cave is very hard, Su Ming knows it well. During a gunfight, rifle bullets can't penetrate it. At most, some fragments will be broken on the mountain wall, leaving a mark. But the savage was able to grab a large piece. Isn't he a Superman? Even in martial arts novels, it's not so exaggerated. The 9-yin white bone claw is powerful enough, right? Mei Chaofeng and her husband relied on this trick to be domineering for half their lives, but it can only penetrate the skull, and later Zhou's Hiruo couldn't even penetrate the skull. Wang Chaoyang, the most powerful of the 5 great masters, had practiced martial arts for his whole life, but he could only poke a few holes in a wooden board with his fingers. His wife Lin Chaoying cheated and wrote a few words on the stone slab with her fingers, which frightened him back immediately. That was just writing a few words, not grabbing a large piece of stone directly, and it was cheating. Su Ming's tears flowed out. It turned out that he had met a peerless master who lived in seclusion in the mountains. Seeing how he lifted heavy objects with ease, the upper limit of martial arts must have exceeded the Jin-Yang system, and maybe it was not far from the Huangyi system. From now on, the good days of taking magic medicine, learning magic skills, opening a harem, reviving ancient martial arts, dominating the world, breaking out of the earth, and breaking the solar system are coming. The peerless master with a hairy face handed the grabbed stone to Su Ming as if offering a treasure. Su Ming was about to kneel down, and was about to shout, "Master, please accept me as your disciple," but he glanced and found that the stone he had grabbed was a little strange. It was white and tender, like a big piece of fat meat. Huh! Su Ming was stunned, and subconsciously stretched out his finger and poked the thing that he didn't know whether it was fat meat or stone. A little bit, there was a dent on it, soft and elastic. He. The savage smiled foolishly. Go. Su Ming felt like he had been electrocuted, and he bent down and grabbed a handful of the big stone at the bottom of the pool. As expected, the white-looking underwater rock was actually not a stone at all. It felt like rubber when he touched it, softer than rubber, but more elastic than fat meat. If I must describe it, this grab is like holding the breasts of a beautiful woman, and it is the type that is difficult to grasp with one hand, and the soft flesh flows out from the gaps between the 5 fingers. Su Ming is not a person who sympathizes with women. He was delighted and shouted, "Look at my magic power." With a splash, he easily tore off a large piece of white and floury breast meat from the bottom of the water. Although he has no practical experience, Su Ming has read a lot of textbooks. The method of dealing with beautiful women's breasts is nothing more than grabbing and licking. He stretched out his tongue without hesitation and licked the piece of meat. Sure enough, the strange taste of the spring water here is caused by this piece of meat. The terrain here is high, and most of the water gathers in the pool. After passing through the bottom of the pool, this large piece of meat is soaked, and then flows out. It is stained with this taste. When the savage saw Su Ming grab a piece, he thought Su Ming was teaching him again. He smiled and grabbed with both hands, and immediately grabbed several more pieces. "Stop, stop, stop. My ancestors, stop catching me." Su Ming's heart was bleeding, and he quickly stopped the savage's mischievous behavior. The white thing at the bottom of the water is not any kind of stone at all, but Tai Sui. And he is 100% sure that what boss he and his friends are looking for is neither a giant salamander nor a savage, but 100% the super big Tai Sui. It's just that it's not under the water and its color is very similar to rocks, so it's hard to be found. Tai Sui is said to be very magical in China, and its other name is Ganoderma lucidum. This thing has almost no life limit. If it is not destroyed and the environment allows, it can almost live forever. The shelf life is longer than the legendary love. In the eyes of the ancients, it symbolizes longevity. The elixir that Qin Shi Huang was looking for back then was this thing. Legend has it that Yao, Shun, and you all ate this thing and lived over 100 years. The history of more than 3 generations has basically been mythical, so no one knows whether eating this thing can make you immortal. However, many medical books have recorded that Tai Sui does have good medicinal value. Shennong's Herbal Classic and Compendium of Materia Medica also specifically mentioned that taking Tai Sui for a long time can make you light and not old, and prolong your life like an immortal. In Su Ming's opinion, this is a bit ethereal. What does taking it for a long time mean? Is it to eat it once a week, or to eat it every day? Is it to eat Tai Sui for 100 years, or to eat Tai Sui for 1,000 years? If it is the latter, even if you can really become an immortal after eating it, no one in the world has such financial strength from ancient times to the present. Modern medicine, in fact, Western medicine has also studied Tai Sui. In Western medicine, Tai Sui is a polymer composed of slime mold, bacteria, and fungi, which is rich in protein, but whether it has medicinal value, how much medicinal value it has, and whether it will cause harm to the human body, there is no conclusion yet. Some people say that it can fight tumors, anti-aging, and improve immunity. Some studies are just the opposite. They believe that eating it will infect various bacteria, which may cause diarrhea at the least and death at the worst. Then you will really become an immortal. As for the tai sui itself, it is also a wonder in the biological world. It is neither an animal nor a plant, but somewhere in between. The only thing that is certain is that in modern society, the rarity of tai sui is definitely higher than that of the first-class protected animals in the country. The older the tai sui is, the rarer it is. Some people even use tai sui to soak in water to drink. Even if it has no medicinal value, the price of tai sui is also amazing from the perspective of collectibles. It is said that tai sui over 1,000 years old costs tens of thousands of dollars per gram. Like the giant panda, tai sui is a national treasure and the oldest living specimen of organisms. After research, some foreign scientists even believe that tai sui is the ancestor of humans and all animals and plants. Occasionally, there are news reports about the discovery of tai sui in newspapers, such as an old lady discovering tai sui, cutting a little off a year and selling it for millions of yuan, and the Chinese Wild Ganoderma lucidum Museum discovered an extremely rare 1,000-year-old tai sui in a certain year, which is worth hundreds of millions, etc. Su Ming is not sure how old this piece of tai sui is and how much it is worth. Those reports contain a lot of hype. But what is certain is that the savage's strong physique and the big baby's extraordinary size and lifespan are definitely related to this tai sui.